Utopia was so fantastical that it could never exist. Anyway, yeah.
Interesting. What's it called? Do you know?
Utopia.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Easy peasy lemon squeezy, man.
All right. No, absolutely. I mean, we could do that one next. I'm down to do that one next if you guys want.
Behind the scenes here.
Yeah, let's do that one next. We'll do Iron Heel later. I'm down to do a 1500s Utopia. Well, do you want to do Utopia after 1984? We're set on 1984.
Yeah. No, I like the Iron Heel. That sounds very interesting.
Okay, we could do Iron Heel.
To read.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do Iron Heel then, but we will do Utopia at some point for sure.
Yeah, cool.
Absolutely, I'm totally down for that. All right, and we went live while we were talking because we ran off the clock. We were just talking about the next 3 or 4 books at this point, or the next, the books keep stacking up, and that's okay. That's part of the fun.
That's all right.
Of it. Once you start digging in, there's a lot of good books out there. A lot of really interesting stories people have told. So welcome here. We're doing the Dystopian Book Club. We're talking about Slaughterhouse-Five tonight.
Slaughterhouse-Five.
Everyone's favorite.
It should have been called So It Goes.
So It Goes. Yeah. And we'll jump into that. We'll explain the So It Goes. Did you say 1984 is next, Belladonna? Yep. Yeah, next will be 1984. As things have been going, we'll probably do two sessions on this book. That's usually what it takes. So we'll probably do 2 sessions. We're talking about skipping next week. So we'll do this week. We'll skip next week. We'll probably finish up Slaughterhouse-Five the week after that. Then we'll do 1984. And then we were talking about the Iron Heel would be next. It's a Jack London novel written in 1908. Should be really interesting. And then maybe Utopia. I do want to check that one out. Absolutely. So we're stacking them up.
There was another one that we got from a viewer.
I did. I have that. Yeah, I have that on the list.
That looked interesting.
There was Red Rising was one, and Anthem was another one that were recommended. Red Rising and Anthem. Someday I want to do the trial by Kafka. That would be really interesting. But we'll get there. Interesting. You can only do so many at once.
This is your jam, man.
This is my jam.
This is a whole new genre for me. So.
Yeah. Oh, I've got my whole arm is all dystopian tattoos, and I've got dystopian. I'm big on the dystopian stuff.
He's got a mushroom cloud.
Yeah, dystopian tattoos here. I'm going to get a dystopian tattoo back here in a couple weeks. I'm big.
I have chickens and flowers. Because I'm the
gas mask.
I'm the little tree hugger in the
family. It's all right.
I haven't got any tattoos.
That's okay. That's okay. Right. Yeah, that's all right.
I used to hide mine when I was in corporate. So I had all mine in my stomach. And then after I had my heart attack, I was like, you only live once. Right. And so I just started doing my whole arm. Because I was
get more tattoos.
Forget it. Yeah. I don't care.
Yeah. I want to do the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse back here.
Oh, yeah.
Basically, go 4 Horsemen. I've got some variations on it I'm looking at. So that should be might be pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump into this Slaughterhouse-Five. As before, I have pulled some of this from Spark Notes, so I want to give credit. There's some stuff from Wiki, there's stuff I pulled from all over the place, but I certainly want to be academically honest and give some credit where I've taken information. I want to jump into the author first, right? And it's an interesting story. I'm going to read a little more, I think, on the author than I normally do because it might have all the little lights go off about the book. Something that may not be entirely obvious as you're reading it, right? As you're going through it. So his name is Kurt Vonnegut. He was born in 1922, lived until 2007, was an American writer and humorist known for his satirical and darkly humorous novels. In a career spanning over 50 years, he published 14 novels, 3 short story collections, 5 plays, and 5 nonfiction works.
Obviously, we didn't get any of his satirical works in this one.
Right. Further collections have been published after his death. All right.
This wasn't funny at all.
So born and raised in Indianapolis.
Oh, Indiana.
Indiana guy. Vonnegut.
He's a Hoosier.
Right. Vonnegut attended Cornell University, but withdrew in January 1943 and enlisted in the U.S. Army.
Cornell's a good university.
Yeah. As part of his training, he studied mechanical engineering at the Carnegie Institute of Technology in the University of Tennessee. He was then deployed to Europe to fight in World War II and was captured by the Germans during the Battle of the Bulge.
Wow, okay.
He was interred in Dresden, where he survived the Allied bombing of the city in a meat locker of the slaughterhouse, where he was imprisoned.
So this is kind of his thing.
This is actually his story.
Yeah, okay.
So it's not entirely obvious getting through Slaughterhouse-Five. This is actually his story.
Okay.
Now, some of it, they call it autobiographical fiction, I think is what they call it.
God, I hope so.
Right, because there's,
there's some cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
There's some cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs stuff in here, and we'll talk a little bit about mental illness, not accusing him or diagnosing him of anything. It's just stuff I found, right? I mean, he's sort of telling his story, right?
As Billy or the narrator?
Not as Billy, he's the narrator.
Okay.
So he does say, and we'll get to it, that Billy was actually someone he served in the military with.
Which obviously saw so much stuff, and he's detached from reality.
Right. And they talk about PTSD and all that kind of stuff. So there is a level.
Still PTSD time, though.
They didn't know what it was back then.
They did not know what it was.
They didn't know what it was. So there is a level. Yeah, shell shock. There's a level of mental illness, and it's kind of his story, which is maybe it changes the perception of the book. It's sort of a true story.
I still don't like it,
right?
But good for him for self-disclosure. You have to appreciate his self-disclosure on it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That it
was
really
something that was inside. He had to get it out. It's like a therapy almost.
Right.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Therapeutical. We got Belladonna said I haven't finished yet, but definitely found it compelling. Some subtle shades of Snake Pit and Gulag Archipelago to me. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we will make sure not to say anything about what we're not talking about tonight then.
Right.
So we don't want to ruin it for anybody.
Yeah, we're not going to finish the book tonight. Right. We'll ramble on. I'll ramble on here, do my preamble for a little while. We'll hit a couple chapters. We'll call it a night and we'll come back.
Yeah, cool.
So don't want to,
So it goes.
So it goes. We'll get into so it goes. So it goes. All right. So the book, Slaughterhouse-Five, it had a couple other names. I only knew it as Slaughterhouse-Five, but there was the Children's Crusade and there was A Duty Dance with Death. It's a 1969 semi-autobiographical fiction-infused anti-war novel by Kurt Vonnegut. It follows the life and experiences of Billy Pilgrim from his early years to his time as an American soldier and chaplain's assistant during World War II to the post-war years, with Billy occasionally traveling through time. Right. And I won't go too much further on to that. So there were a lot of critics. I know we kind of criticized it a lot. A lot of people did criticize the work. I'll read some of the criticisms. One was interesting. I had to look it up. So it was accused Slaughterhouse-Five of being a quietist work because Billy Pilgrim believes that the notion of free will is a quaint earthling illusion. The problem, according to Robert Merrill and Peter Stroll, is that Vonnegut critics seem to think he's saying the same thing as now I'm going to pronounce this wrong every time, the Tralfamadorians.
Oh, yeah. Tralfamadorians.
Tralfamadorians.
That's how it was said in my Audible.
In the Audible.
Tralfamadorians.
Tralfamadorians. So I had to look up quietism because I've always been interested in philosophy, and I might hit on a little more philosophy than anybody wants to hear in my preamble here. So quietism sees the role of philosophy as broadly therapeutic or remedial. Quietist philosophers believe that philosophy has no positive thesis to contribute, but rather that its value is in diffusing confusions in the linguistic conceptual frameworks of other subjects, including non-quietist philosophy. For quietists, advancing knowledge or settling debates, particularly between realists and non-realists, is not the job of philosophy. Rather, philosophy should liberate the mind by diagnosing confusing concepts. So it's an interesting idea, and it's sort of anti-philosophy. It doesn't see a lot of value coming out of philosophy. It's more of a therapeutic. So kind of interesting. And I could sort of see that as some of the critics there.
It's about the journey of going through it and discussing it, not actually what you're discussing.
Right. It's not going anywhere. Yeah. Anthony Burgess said Slaughterhouse is kind of an evasion in a sense, like J.M. Barrie, Peter Pan, in which we're being told to carry the horror of the Dresden bombing and everything it implies up to a level of fantasy. For Charles Harris, the main idea emerging from Slaughterhouse-Five seems to be that the proper response to life is one of resigned acceptance, which is certainly a theme.
Well,
Yeah, it's a theme in the book, right? It is absolutely.
I mean, these guys went through a lot.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
For Alfred Cousin,
So
right, exactly. Yeah. So it goes.
I mean, at some point you have to embrace the suck.
Right. And that's basically
to be able to get past it.
Right. Yeah. It's easy to say the proper response to life is one of resigned acceptance, but he was a POW in World War II.
It's easy to say
he
when
was
you
there
haven't
when
been
Dresden
through
got
it.
firebombed. Yeah.
Right.
At some point you just shut off. And I feel like
you don't know
right. Yeah.
You don't know how bad things are until you've been through
right.
it.
At some point you just shut off. And that's sort of, I think, what we see is he just kind of shut off.
Vonnegut, and I think when he was writing it, Vietnam had been going on for a while. And so maybe that was very triggering because they'd just gone through, they'd experienced all of this and now back at it again, so maybe
back at it again. And people didn't really support Vietnam either. They weren't supporting the troops.
There was not a lot of support.
It was a complete, not to just, oh my gosh, I'm going through it again, but like nobody gets it. Everybody thinks that like what we're doing is wrong.
Right. Yeah. And an interesting reference later in the book is he starts listing off historical things, and they were all about Vietnam and the Vietnam era.
Yeah.
So even though the story is about his experiences in World War II, it was written during Vietnam, and he sprinkles in some Vietnam stuff into it, which is kind of an interesting thing. And then Belladonna, you said he's so shattered that he's living in the past, remembering his future. Right. And he sort of is. He's given up on time. He's kind of given up on a lot. Yeah.
Wow, that's really deep, Belladonna.
Yeah. So we'll keep going. All right, then we have Alfred Cousin. Vonnegut deprecates any attempt to see tragedy that day in Dresden. He likes to say with arch fatalism, citing one horror after another, so it goes. And we'll get into so it goes, but interesting, in analyzing it, when he says so it goes, that's him as the narrator, not so much like the character, but that's him as the narrator sort of addressing things and then kind of moving on as if a death. Yeah, exactly. Every time there was a death, he says so it goes, and he kind of moves on from it. I think someone that has seen that much
it sort
death
of made me think, like, because I know we're making fun of so many so it goes, but like, it kind of hits in deeper than that. If it's annoying you, all of these so it goes, like that's war. Because there's so many so it goes,
It seems like it's to me, like you told me how many were in there.
Yeah, it was
like,
108. 108 is
like,
what they said.
To me, it felt like thousands.
Right.
But then when you said what it was, what he had represented, I was thinking like this whole thing was just riddled with death.
It's just death.
And when people are around death that much.
What do you say? So it goes, I guess.
I mean, you have healthcare workers that people pass and they have to distance themselves from it because, I mean, honestly, like this man and the other people are already pretty shattered in this book. Can you imagine if they were clinging to every antecedent of so it goes?
Right. Yeah. So you dig in, it's like, wow, the book, it kind of changes the book deep. A little bit. It just changes the book a lot. I
just didn't care for the way he wrote was the thing, He didn't, he couldn't keep my brain in order, I think. I was having a hard time for his rhythm was weird for me.
No, you like Orwell more.
I did. I'm enjoying the way Orwell writes.
Yeah, I've read 3 of his books recently, and they all go down pretty easy. And we got C'est la vie, Belladonna throughout the C'est la vie, and that's absolutely C'est la vie. I think that's such as life is what that means, if I translate it properly there. That's a good say. It could have been C'est la vie instead of So it goes, but he was just an old guy in the war. He was So it goes. All right, so we'll keep going. Censorship. So that was some of the criticism, and I can see it, not necessarily agree or disagree with it, but I can definitely see why they criticized, but I could see why he wrote it the way he did as well. Censorship, it was actually censored a lot.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Slaughterhouse-Five has been the subject of many attempts at censorship due to its irreverent tone, purposeful, obscene content, depictions of sex, American soldiers' use of profanity, and perceived heresy. And I guess there was some heresy.
Look at TV now, though.
I know.
I mean,
Come on. Any of this. Yeah, this is not
it's not
50 Shades of Grey here.
Right.
Right. It's a long way from 50 Shades of Grey or anything like that. For the time. Right. Yeah, when you're talking the 60s and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean,
I think at some point they had to cut the censorship off because TV now is worse than this book.
So much worse, yeah. So we're saying the United States, it has at times been banned from literature classes, removed from school libraries, stuck from literary curricula. In 1972, following the ruling of Todd versus Rochester Community Schools, it was banned from Rochester Community Schools in Oakland County, Michigan. Circuit judge described the book as depraved, immoral, psychotic, vulgar, and anti-Christian.
Wow.
But that's war, isn't it?
I guess Todd had a big problem with it.
Todd had a big problem with that book, He did not like Vonnegut or the story. All right, so the narrator isn't so much a major character as it is, I think it flows into what we've been talking about, which is the narrator seems anonymous while he's also clearly identifying himself as Kurt Vonnegut. When he says, that was I, that was me, that was the author of this book, as noted above. As an American soldier during World War II, Vonnegut was captured by Germans, about all the bullets, transported to Dresden. He and fellow prisoners of war survived the bombing while being held in the deep cellar of Schlaughterhouse-Five, which is Slaughterhouse-Five. Poorly pronunciated in German. So he says, like, it was him, right? So as the narrator, he's sort of sharing his own experiences. And in 1995, Vonnegut publicly revealed that Billy Pilgrim was modeled on Edward Joe Crone, a thin soldier who died in Dresden. So he did say it was actually written after somebody. There's another character comes in later. Edgar Derby was modeled on Vonnegut's fellow prisoner, Mike Paglia. So a lot of these guys were actually, a lot of the characters in the book were real people.
That's the problem. People didn't want to hear about it.
Yeah, no one wanted to.
Let's censor it because nobody wants to hear the realities
about
of
it.
war.
Right. And it was very much, and we'll get into it, very much an anti-war book, and maybe it needed to be. All right, Trailfamidorians was a race of extraterrestrial beings who appear to humans like upright toilet plungers with a hand on top, in which is set a single green eye. So the toilet plunger aliens, they abduct Billy Pilgrim and teach him about time's relation to the world as a fourth dimension, fate, the nature of death. The Trailfamidorians are featured in several Vonnegut's novels, which is interesting. So he's written about these guys in 5 novels.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm kind of wondering, and he's not around to answer, and I'm not accusing him of anything. Maybe he thought they were real. He wrote about them a lot. Or maybe he was just fascinated by them, but he did write about a lot. 5 of his books, he's got the toilet plunger aliens in them.
Yeah.
Certainly it was a fascination to him.
Yeah. Or maybe like they represented, like, you know how we got the lizard people now? Maybe.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe they represented something like that.
They were the lizard people. Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Though.
He's the first ancient aliens guy.
He's the first ancient. He did write about him a lot, apparently. Yeah. So it was.
But it's funny how they haven't, like, I know that that Vonnegut's probably not like the most prolific, well-known author, but you know, it's funny that we haven't really taken on those as alien. You know, it's always been the Greys or it's been something else.
Yeah.
Like it's
right.
I wonder why they
didn't catch. People didn't want the toilet paper aliens. I guess.
Right. The plunger aliens. Yeah. It says if he was a POW in Dresden, he was. Yeah, no, he was a POW. Yeah, he was a POW in Dresden for sure. All right. So now we go to So It Goes. So from what I read, I didn't count them, 108 times, shows up in the book. The phrase So It Goes appears every mention of death and mortality in Slaughterhouse-Five. This seemingly flippant phrase reflects a Trailfamidorian philosophy that comforts Billy Pilgrim, While a person is dead in one particular moment, they're still alive and well in all of the other moments of their life, because all of time exists at once. Billy appreciates the simplicity of the Tralfamadorian response to death. And every time he encounters a dead person, he simply shrugs and says, "So it goes." The repetition of this phrase also illustrates how war desensitizes people to death.
Mm-hmm.
Since with each passive mention of "so it goes," the narrator is subtly telling the death toll. So you can count.
Well, if you actually believe that time is not linear, and that everything is happening at the same time, which could be difficult for, I mean, I know you talk about that kind of stuff, like, how time exists and all that stuff. If you really believe that everything's going on at the same time and people are alive and dead, and that, like, why would you care if you saw a dead body then?
Right, because at some point in their life, if all time exists at once, right, right.
I mean, it wouldn't.
It's like a movie, Yes, the movie's over, but you can just rewind and rewatch the movie.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, so it goes isn't, it seems flippant, but you would have no need to mourn because if you truly believed that they were alive somewhere else, there'd be no mourning attached to it.
Right, yeah.
Maybe
and we can even see that in space. Like, we're looking at stars that are billions of years old.
Right.
And so let's just say there was an alien planet there and they happen to be looking at our galaxy. We're alive now, but when they see us, we will be dead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so we are existing now, but at the same time as they're seeing us, I don't know. I'm not.
Is it a 5 billion time gap? No, it's a 5 billion year time gap. Absolutely.
Yeah. But and so when they see us, they're seeing us now, but for us, it'll be 5 billion years in the future.
Right.
So and so in a way, we are sort of existing at the same time as the past. I don't know.
Right. No, you're right. No, it's interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I am in a lot of near-death experience groups.
Right. You've been fascinated with
I'm fascinated by people in near-death experience. Well, because I had one of my own.
Right.
So this type of stuff for me is fascinating because, you get so it goes. And that's kind of how the attitudes of a lot of people that I've seen in these groups that I'm in that have had near-death experiences, like, oh, it's okay because someday I'm going to go on to this other part of who I am, which is, energy to do this or do that, do that. So it's not like there's no end to it.
It just continues.
Right. There's just, somebody dies, so it goes because, I'm going to become this now,
Right.
I will say that I listened to it and it was narrated by James Franco.
Right. You like James Franco.
I do love him. Yeah. But he was very flippant in the way he said it.
Right. And maybe
almost to the point of being annoyed.
Right.
By saying that he had to keep saying it.
Right. Yeah. Right. And maybe that was intentional. Because he's a smart guy.
Yeah, he has a PhD.
He's a PhD. Yeah, James Franco. All right. So Belladonna had said he had to use the trafe wisdom of time to reconcile the finality of death, which is absolutely true. And then his take on eternal souls. Yeah, it sort of is the idea of eternal souls, but rather than an afterlife, it's just a never-ending life.
Yeah.
Right. Basically, you're moving forward, but all time exists at once. So it sort of is an afterlife type situation. All right. Style. So style here. So in keeping with Vonnegut's signature style, the novel's syntax and sentence structures are simple. Irony, sentimentality, black humor, and didactism are prevalent throughout the work. So I had to look up didactism. And it's interesting. It has two meanings. It's a philosophy that emphasizes instructional and information qualities in literature, art, and design. In art, design, architecture, landscape, didactism is a conceptual approach that is driven by the urgent need to explain. The flip side is, around the 19th century, the term didactic came to be used as a criticism for work that appears to be overburdened with instructive, factual, or otherwise educational information to the detriment of the enjoyment of the reader. So Edgar Allan Poe called didactism the work of heresies in his essay, The Poetic Principle. So it sort of means the same thing, but one is it's positive because it has this kind of educational sort of, side of it, and then complaining that it's too much. It's not enjoyable. It's too educational. So didactism was interesting.
Yeah.
Slaughterhouse-Five is broken into small pieces, and in this case, into brief experiences, each focused on a specific point in time. Vonnegut has noted that his books are essentially mosaics made up of a whole bunch of tiny little chips, and each chip is a joke. Vonnegut also includes hand-drawn illustrations in Slaughterhouse-Five and also in his novel, The Breakfast of Champions. Characteristically, Vonnegut makes heavy use of repetition, frequently using the phrase "so it goes." He uses it to refrain with when events of death, dying, and mortality occur. So I know we've kind of hit that. It was also categorized as postmodern and metafiction. And the metafiction is because the first chapter is really sort of about him writing the book.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a book, becomes a book about a book.
Yeah, by chapter 2, I'm like, this guy's talking about writing this book right here. Like,
right. Yeah.
We're talking about him writing this book.
Yeah, it's sort of, so it becomes metafiction in that sense. Because, kind of like Princess Bride. Like Princess Bride starts out with the grandpa and the kid, and he's like, let me read you a story.
Right.
And then you jump into the story.
Well, I think I mentioned last week, I thought I had the wrong book.
Right.
Yeah. Am I supposed to? Is this it?
Yeah. I thought it was a book about him writing the book. And so I didn't take any notes or anything for the first chapter. So
right. You're like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I'm like, I'm not sure what we're reading here.
Right. It's Princess Bride. If you thought Princess Bride was this quest and all this stuff, you're reading like, it's an old guy reading a kid a book. I don't get it. When's his bedtime here? What's going on? So it is a little bit of that. Little Princess Bride.
Princess Bride was great.
Well before Princess Bride was written, it was a Little Princess Bride in it. Let's see. Also, another note. Let's see, anything else I want to hit on that? First sentence says all this happened more or less. So he said all this happened more or less. So in 2010. This was ranked as number 38 on America's book review list of 100 best lines from novels. So it was number 38 on 100 best lines of all time. Was all this happened more or less?
Really?
Yeah, interesting.
Wow, I'd like to see that list. That'd be interesting.
Right? Yeah, 100 best lines.
That line's also been used, copied. I couldn't give you specific examples, but I've heard that same sentiment in several films as well.
This is interesting. Yeah, all this happened more or less. I'll have to start all the YouTube videos with that.
Making YouTube videos.
All this happened more or less. And then appreciate you at the end, which is very
Yeah.
People literally will say that. Like we were in line at Atwood's getting feed, and someone's like, "Oh, next person over here," and the guy's like, "Oh, appreciate you." I mean, that's just what people say. That's just what people say out there. Yeah,
it's the Texas form of thank you.
Right. Yeah. Appreciate you. I mean, yeah. I was at the gun show today, looking at stuff at the gun show, and it's constantly appreciate you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just how the people talk out here.
No, it's good, but
all right. Themes. Number one theme, of course, war and death. Vonnegut attempts to come to terms with war through the narrator's eyes. Billy Pilgrim, an example within the novel showing Vonnegut's aim to accept his past war experiences, occurs in chapter 1 when he states all this happened more or less. The war parts anyway are pretty much true. One guy I knew really was shot in Dresden for taking a teapot that wasn't his. Another guy did threaten to have his personal enemies killed by hired gunmen after the war, and so on. I changed all the names. So that's kind of interesting, right? Really is the war and the death. Yeah. I want to hit on that. I'll come back. That's right. Another theme was Christian philosophy, and he was not big on Christian philosophy. So Christian philosophy is present in Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, but is not very well regarded when God and Christianity is brought up in the work, is mentioned in a bitter or disregarding tone. One only has to look at how the soldiers react to the mention of it. Through Billy Pilgrim has adopted some part of Christianity. He did not ascribe to all of it. J.C. Jutz summarized it best when he mentions that Triflemadorian determinism and passivity that Pilgrim later adopts, as well as Christian fatalism, whereas God has ordained the atrocities of war. And that was kind of his thing. And I think probably a lot of people involved in horrible situations, war. You wonder, like, well, did God want this to happen? Right. And, maybe don't go too deep into that, but adopting the Christian idea that God had everything planned and he had given his approval for the war to happen.
Yeah. Well, I know that my
people forget about free will, though.
Right. There's the free will. Yeah. They talk about free will a lot here.
They go into that. Yeah. I remember my nan, she sort of went on Easter and Christmas and stuff, but she even admitted to us, like, the war lost her faith. Like, she just couldn't believe that a God would allow that to happen.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And that's sort of that's sort of the thing, right? Yeah. I think they're absolutely hitting on sort of the theme of the book and why I think a lot of people didn't like it for that reason. But yeah, I feel like if you've gone through those situations, it's going to test your faith. If nothing else, certainly going to test your faith.
Yeah.
Next theme is the Trollope-Madorian philosophy. As Billy Pilgrim becomes unstuck in time, he's faced with a new type of philosophy. When Billy Pilgrim becomes acquainted with the Trollope-Madorians, he learns a different viewpoint concerning fate and free will. While Christianity may state that faith and free will are matters of God's divine choice and human interaction, the Trollope-Madorianism would disagree. According to Trollope-Madorian philosophy, things and always will be.
Just call them the Dorians.
The Dorians. Maybe we'll shorten it to the Dorians. I can pronounce Dorian.
Right.
Things are and always will be, and there's nothing you can change them. When Billy asks why they have chosen him, the Dorians reply, why you, why us, for that matter, why anything, because this moment simply is. The mindset of the Dorians is not one in which free will exists. Things happen because they were always destined to be happening. The narrator of the story explains that the Dorians see time all at once. The concept of time is best explained by the Dorians themselves as they speak to Billy Pilgrim on the matter, stating, I am a Dorian, seeing all time as you might see a stretch of the Rocky Mountains. All time is all time. It does not change. It does not lend itself to warnings or explanations. It simply is. So it is definitely a different idea, right? Not.
Have you seen that new? There's a new book, and he's done a lot of studies. He did a lot of studies with observing apes and such. I forget what it's called now, but it's determinism. It is actually doing its rounds. Where determinism and there is no free will and such, and that everything we do is not actually a case of free will. It's just that it's a series of events that have happened leading up to that decision. And I've read some of it and I can understand where they're coming from, but I don't know. I feel like it's a bit dangerous to kind of be throwing that around because there's a lot of people that are really ready now to just absolve themselves of all accountability.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly what it does.
And I think the concept of free will possibly came about in the first place as a way to make people be accountable for their own, own decisions and stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. No, I think that is 100% great point. Without free will, you have no accountability. And it does seem like our society is drifting away from the idea of accountability almost entirely. That's a very, you make a good point on that, on determinism. And I've seen from, different philosophy classes, the argument for and against free will. And you certainly can make a case against free will, against things just being a chain of events, right? You pick up the cup because you're thirsty, not because you're thinking, hey, I want to pick up the cup. And if you tie in things like addictive personalities and all that other stuff, it's easy to step away from, oh, no, I don't have a choice, right? Absolve yourself. And I think that's Belladonna's comment, which is saying God allows it, that takes the burden off us to do something about the horrors humanity is capable of. Absolutely. It's as a society, it's as individuals. So I think you're right.
I mean, I was raised Catholic. And I went to Catholic school. But, what I was taught was, obviously there's stuff that God allows it, God allows you to make the decision to be a good person, to sin or not sin, to treat people the way you'd want to be treated. So, I mean, I don't understand how they can say that Christianity doesn't believe in free will when Christianity
is free will. You have to have
you
free
have
will.
to you have
Or
to
you
have
don't have
free will,
accountability.
and you can't just say God allows it. I mean, obviously God allows all of it,
or he doesn't. Right, he either does or he doesn't,
because you've been put here to make a decision to either become a good person and treat people well, or to not, and then learn from that. You know, but that's just me. Everybody has different
no, I get it.
It's the believing.
It's the free It's kind of the free will paradox, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, and people who say, "Well, it's not me," you know, I don't have any choice. God allowed it. Yeah, that's a cop out.
Right, it's a cop out. Yeah, that takes out the accountability.
Yeah, you have a choice to be a good person or not every single moment of every single day.
Right. Yeah.
And maybe that's where the whole idea of free will came from, was that ancient philosophers were going, well, if the gods are everywhere and the gods, what's stopping us? And so maybe that's where the whole idea of free will came about, was because people were just doing stuff, going, the demons made me do it, or the angels made me do it, or the
absolutely,
because they had gods everywhere in everything,
all sorts, the trees and the sticks and the rocks, all of it, right, no, absolutely. So that kind of
I'm a fan of the concept, the idea of free will. I accept the determinism part of it, and being aware of why we're making decisions we're making is helps you have your own accountability and your own autonomy. But I'd rather keep my autonomy, thank you.
Right, exactly. And take the accountability and the responsibility of it, that I made these decisions.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. No, agree 100% on that. Postmodernism. I was going to get into postmodernism. I'm already kind of on a long ramble. I'm not a fan of postmodernism. It is one of the themes, so recurring theme in Kurt Vonnegut's works, arose as a rejection of modernist narrative and structures. It's itself a restatement of Christian theology. There's no purpose to life. Effects do not have causes. The only reason for anything is that God has ordained it. The juxtaposition is displayed throughout the book, rather directly asking the reader to confront the logical absurdities inherent in both Christian faith and Triflamadorianism. Is not by accident that this critique dismisses both the rigid and dogmatic approaches to Christianity, as well as being a critique of determinism, determinism being a modern philosophy. So not postmodern, but modern. So I had a bunch of notes on postmodernism. I'm probably just going to toss them all and keep going, but it's an interesting, it's a thing. It's sort of the idea that you can't measure anything. Skeptical of explanations was claimed to be valid for all groups, cultures, traditions, or races, and instead focuses on relative truths of each person. It considers reality to be a mental construct. Postmodernists reject the possibility of unmediated reality or objective rational knowledge, asserting that all interpretations are contingent on this perspective for which they are made. So we see a lot of postmodernism nowadays, which is the idea of the relative truths and all that stuff. I'm not a fan of postmodernism. I would be more of a modernist. Modernism. So modernism was, I think, started in 1775, 1851 through the 19th century, which was kind of the 1800s. Kind of the Enlightenment. So it's let's see the origins. So it's more common, especially in the West, are those who see it as a society progressive trend of thought that affirms the power of human beings to create, improve, reshape their environment with the aid of practical experimentation, scientific knowledge, and technology. So from the perspective, modernism encourages the re-examination of every aspect of existence, from commerce to philosophy, with the goal of finding that which was holding back progress and replacing it with new ways of reaching the same end. So it was more of the chain of thought that started the idea of science, scientific knowledge, creating, building, growing, as opposed to sort of being trapped in this, there is no truth, no reality of postmodernism.
There's no truth, no reality. So that's the Matrix.
Right, that's the Matrix, right. A lot of people are very postmodernist nowadays.
I think it's also touching on that free will determinism conversation we were just having. The modernism seems to be the free will, and the postmodernism seems to be the determinism
Yeah,
viewpoint.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think you absolutely called it with the determinism. And then Belladonna had mentioned that I'm kind of existential. So I like existentialism. I kind of studied that a little bit. There's a couple of different aspects on existentialism. I hate it when people call something existential in the news because they're really killing that word existential, because it's often used nowadays as, meaning to existence. So like, oh, it's an existential crisis. And in that, they're just taking the word existence and saying it threatens our existence. So it becomes an existential crisis. But
it's overused, like literally.
Literally, it's literally overused. literally,
I mean,
right? Literally overused.
Literally is
it's
overused.
Killed and beaten. Yeah, existential is
at least by my kids' generation.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And
I literally just died, Mom.
I literally.
Oh, okay.
Literally. Like, that's not what that means. That's actually not what that means. It's the opposite of what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So next theme was mental illness, and we talked about that a little bit. Some have argued that Vonnegut is speaking out for veterans. Many of those post-war states are untreatable. Pilgrim's symptoms have been identified with what is now called post-traumatic stress disorder, which didn't exist as a term when the novel was written. In the words of one writer, perhaps due to the fact that PTSD was not officially recognized as a mental disorder yet, the establishment fails Billy by neither providing an accurate diagnosis nor proposing any coping mechanism. Billy found life meaninless due to his experience in the war. All right.
His coping mechanism
was traveling through time.
Was traveling through time.
Time travel.
Realities.
Right.
That's what he was doing.
Right. It was time travel.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Life meaningless due to his experiences in the war, which desensitized and forever changed him. And I suspect the author is right about himself to some extent in that too. And I don't mean that in any kind of negative way. So this was kind of fun. We're getting close. We're getting close to starting the book. I promise.
I just know from myself with, like, I wouldn't say PTSD. However, I do find sometimes the life circumstances that would have possibly brought that on, sometimes when it does trigger you and it hits you and those memories come flooding back, you aren't in the room anymore. You are 5 years ago. And so even though he was using the analogy with the aliens and time traveling and stuff, but that is actually what happens, when you're experiencing and going through those events.
And his brain, your brain can only cope as much as your brain can possibly cope.
At some point it breaks.
And that's what a defense mechanism is.
Right.
It's taking and helping him not totally break in this reality is where he took himself to another place. Because God knows what Billy would have been like had he not, just taken his.
Just gone, just checked out.
Just checked out.
Just checked out. Yeah. All pretty horrible stuff.
So he didn't have to keep reliving the stuff
So when you look at the book we haven't started the book because I think it's important. I think it's important to really kind of look at all this stuff before you really get into it, because I think it really kind of frames it. It really gives you a different view on it as you're going. So this was kind of interesting. So why does Slaughterhouse-Five utilize a non-linear narrative structure? So the Trollope-Madorians tell Billy that their novels have no beginning, no middle, no end, no suspense, no moral, no causes, no effects.
Yeah, I remember reading that, and it's just made of stuff that would be interesting, and beautiful.
Yeah, they're simply snapshots with no necessary relation between scenes. They show life in its many complexities. Vonnegut is attempting to write his novel utilizing the structure of the Trollope-Madorians. His plot and characters jump between time and space, settling on seemingly random scenes, some funny, some mundane, some beautiful, some tragic.
Isn't that life, though?
Right. Yeah. So Vonnegut does not believe the final product will shed any sort of meaningful light on war, life, or why things are as they are. Billy Pilgrim is one of confusion, terror, flashbacks, and perhaps even insanity. If the Trollope-Madorians are assumed to be the only the imaginings of a traumatized mind, in the end, Vonnegut doesn't have any answers when it comes to chaos in Billy's life. In fact, the novel ends yet another question. The only thing Vonnegut can truly offer when confronted with the jumble mess that is life is so it goes. Vonnegut's remarks about the impossible task of writing a book that encapsulates his war, saying, "I've finished my book now," This one is a failure, and it had to be. So it's kind of interesting. He felt the book had to be.
Well, he was struggling. Chapter 1 was him struggling just to write it.
Struggling, yeah.
Yeah. He needed to get it out somehow, so it would just keep rattling around, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And Belladonna, no need to apologize. I didn't know what you mean by didn't realize the agenda. We're just talking about the book. You know, no major agenda. Oh, you're fine. Go ahead. Whatever you got to do. You got to have your water. You have to hydrate. Yeah. It's a rule of threes. 3 days without water. Can't do it. I just did 5 prepping videos this weekend that'll be up on the channel at some point. And the rule of threes was one of them. Yeah. All right, genre. Do we need to hit the genre? Postmodern, metafiction.
It fits into our dystopian book club.
It does. It fits into the dystopian book club. There was some good stuff in here I liked. Let's see. So on first reading, Slaughterhouse-Five is perhaps most easily identifiable as science fiction novel. After all, the protagonist Billy claims to be a time traveler who is abducted by aliens. Right, and we'll stop there. No spoilers. However, unlike the traditional science fiction novel, Slaughterhouse-Five lacks both a strong plot line and a clear villain, which was great. So in chapter 1, the narrator recalls the words of his father. You know, you never wrote a story with a villain in it. Billy's story is no exception. What's more, the novel does not make any serious attempt to build a realistic alternative world for the reader. The Trollope-Madorians, whom Billy describes as 2 feet high, green, shaped like plumbers, friends, seem more ridiculous than realistic, yet is common to the genre. The novel does rely on science fiction elements to explore big religious and political themes such as fate, the afterlife, capitalism, and class. So something else, the science fiction narrative does not feel fully realized, in part because the other narratives, World War II, Vonnegut's autobiography, are more central to the story, which is true. I mean, I don't know that I would call it science fiction, and that's sort of what they just said anyway, right? Which is, you know, this is not Star Trek, right? It's not about exploring the galaxy. Yeah.
I mean, I think you put aliens in.
You had aliens and time travel, so it's hard not to.
In the book store.
Right, yeah. You got aliens and time travel. It's hard not to put a little sci-fi sticker on it.
Yeah.
Like, what does it take? What does it take here, guys? Spaceships, laser weapons. What do you got to do? All right. And I liked this one. This one was pretty good. And I feel like it really kind of summarized. So it says, finally, Slaughterhouse-Five is a war novel. However, one of its goals is to upset the conventions of the genre. A war novel is traditionally a story with a tense plot line that involves a few dramatic battle scenes from which a hero emerges. But there are no villains in Vonnegut's novel, either behind German lines or back at home in the United States. There's no heroes either. There are no winners and no losers. There's no beginning and no end to the war, which is, for the time travel Billy, constantly happening. Vonnegut wants to show just how terrible, cruel, and absurd war really is. He has no interest in recreating suspenseful and dramatic narratives for battle to romanticize war. Thus, the novel can be seen as a dismantling of the convention of the war novel genre and ultimately emerging as an anti-war novel. Yeah, no heroes, nothing good to say about it. Isn't like,
he talked about life.
Right, he
had the realities of life in it, and then the hard reality of what that did to them and how they had no support for no mental health supports. And what life was like for them coming back at that. And you know, people were against the novel because a lot of people don't want to hear the truth in life.
Right, don't want to hear it. Right. Yeah.
And like sorry, I would just like the wife of his friend in the first chapter. At first, she was really angry at him because she was like, you know, you're going to make this, and it's going to be all these hero stories, and you're going to romanticize it all, and some. I don't know if that really happened, but he didn't romanticize it.
Did not.
That's right. He promised her he wouldn't.
Yeah, no, he did not. Yeah, and I think that was one of the alternative titles. I'm going to scroll back up to the top here of my notes really quick, which was
the Children's Crusade.
Children's Crusade, right? Children's Crusade, because a lot of the soldiers, a lot of the soldiers were really young. You know, especially World War II, a lot of young kids. So it really was the Children's Crusade.
A lot of people lying about their age so they could go to war.
Right, so they could go to war. Yeah, a lot of kids out there with no idea what was going on, facing horrible stuff.
I'm hearing that now with a lot of like the kids of my friends of my daughter, and they've had all the video games and the Fortnite and the this, and we're talking about political situation that's going on, and a lot of them are like going, yeah, bring it on, like, yeah, and I think they've lost that disconnect, like,
right,
everything's a video game.
And war is romanticized again,
right? And it's not, there's nothing good about it. But I mean, you look at, if you've seen Band of Brothers, that was the HBO series. I mean, I think Tom Hanks did a great job, Steven Spielberg. They did all the interviews, they talked to the soldiers, but it's clearly a pro-war story, because it starts with the troops landing on the beach and it ends with them defeating Hitler and going home. So you have this story, this progression, as you see the heroes grow and the great victory at the end, the great conquest, and people died along the way, but at the end they were victorious. Whereas this story, not so much victorious,
That's because it's for the better of the good. Not for the individual.
Right. Yeah. This ends, it does not end by defeating Germany or defeating Hitler, even though it's the same war, right? We're talking about the same war, too much different stories, absolutely. But that was his intent. That was not accidental. All right. So 9 minutes left. Should we tear into chapter 1 and then we'll call it good for tonight? So we actually did talk about the book a little bit.
Oh, Belladonna, the Children's Crusade through this. Are you talking about the Children's Crusade of the Middle Ages, the early Middle Ages? Is that what you're talking about? Because I did a little bit of back reading on that as well. There was a crusade that children were sent. And they were sent and they were sent to on a ruse that they were going to be enslaved once they got to Africa.
Wow.
Yeah. And some of them were thankfully sent home, and others got enslaved and such too. Yeah. So I don't know if
Vonnegut know about that. Yeah, no, I didn't know about that. He might.
Yeah, I don't know if Vonnegut labeled it that for that, or if he even knew about it. But yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah, monks. Yeah,
monks. Yeah,
it's the reality of how horrible people are in the world.
Yeah, there's a lot of horrible out there. Absolutely, and I think people need.
Back in those days, children were expendable. They were very.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, I've been reading a book, and I confess I sort of abandoned it, but it was about the Machiavellian times, which was sort of around the early popes and all that. It's more historical than anything else, but they talk about the child death rate was so high. Like the chance of a child, not making it to adulthood was so high that, I mean, people were like, oh, you got 3 kids. Okay, well, we'll see if they make it. I mean, there just was very disconnected from the children. Children were very disposable because the chance of surviving was not great. Right. And they even talked about that, and there were no books about childcare, any of that stuff. And they might be like, oh, well, they just didn't write a lot. And it's like, no, I mean, you had books about 16 different ways to make tea. Yeah, there were plenty of books written and none about childcare.
Because people didn't care, because they didn't think the kid was going to live.
Because you kind of didn't think they would. Yeah, like there weren't a lot of paintings of people holding children. Like the death rate was so high that they were just sort of disposable.
and like you didn't have birth control, so obviously
cranking out kids all the time.
People were cranking out kids,
right? And a lot of them did not survive. Yeah, poverty was certainly part of it. I'm talking about, like, I think it was the 1400s and 1500s.
People were just dying of stuff and water at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, you could get a paper cut and you could die.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, it's like 7:54. We've been kind of, just checking it out. That's all right.
How many chapters in this book?
10 chapters.
Okay.
10 chapters. Yeah.
But we've overviewed a lot of the gritty themes. I feel like next week would just be more like chapter summary and highlights of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we'll dig in, we'll focus in. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. Should we just do next Sunday? I know we were talking about skipping. Do you want to go for next Sunday, since we didn't cover actually a lot of the story itself? So it gives you another week, and we'll jump in next Sunday.
Yeah,
if that works.
You want to maybe do chapter 1 now, just quickly, because it is so separated.
Get that out of the way.
Story. Yeah,
it's sort of throwaway.
Yeah, it's so not. Yeah, it has nothing to do with the rest of the book.
I can read through this. I got my notes here. I can read through them pretty quick.
Yeah,
all right, chapter 1. Vonnegut writes in his own voice, introducing his experiences of the firebombing of Dresden in Eastern Germany during World War II, while he was a prisoner of war, and his attempt for many years to complete a book on the subject. He begins with the claim that most of what follows is true, particularly the parts about war. With funding from the Guggenheim Foundation, Vonnegut and his wartime friend Bernhard V. O'Hare returned to Dresden in 1967 in a taxi on the way to Dresden slaughterhouse that served as their prison. Vonnegut and O'Hare strike up a conversation with the cab driver about life under communism. It is to this man, Gerald Mueller, as well as O'Hare's wife, Mary, that Vonnegut dedicates Slaughterhouse-Five. Mueller later sends O'Hare a Christmas card with wishes for world peace. Vonnegut relates his unsuccessful attempts to write about Dresden in the 23 years since he was there during the war. He's very proud of the outline of the story that he draws in crayon on the back of a roll of wallpaper.
Yep, that was his best one.
Yeah, the wallpaper outline represents each character in a different color of crayon, with a line for each progressing through the story's chronology. Eventually, the lines enter a zone of orange cross hatching, which represents the firebombing, and those who survive the attack emerge and finally stop at a point when the POWs are returned. However, the outline does not help Vonnegut's writing. He initially expected to craft a masterpiece about this grave and immense subject, but while this horrific destruction he witnessed occupies his mind over the years, it defies his attempt to capture it in writing. Vonnegut's anti-war stance only adds to the difficulty, since as a filmmaker, acquaintance remarks to him writing a book against war would prevent war as effectively as writing a book against glaciers would prevent their motion.
Yeah.
Right. Vonnegut recounts the events of his post-war life, including a stint as a student of anthropology at the University of Chicago, a police reporter, and a public relations man for General Electric in New York. In the years following the war, Vonnegut encounters ignorance about the magnitude of Dresden's destruction, and when he contacts the U.S. Air Force for information, he discovers the event is still classified as top secret. Around 1964, Vonnegut takes his young daughter and her friend to visit Bernard V. O'Hare in Pennsylvania. He meets Mary O'Hare, who is disgusted by the likelihood that Vonnegut will portray himself and his fellow soldiers as manly heroes rather than the babies they were. With his right hand raised, Vonnegut vows not to glorify war and promises to call his book The Children's Crusade. Later that night, he reads about the Children's Crusade and the earlier bombing of Dresden in 1760. While teaching at Iowa Writers' Workshop, Vonnegut lands a contract to write 3 books, of which Slaughterhouse-Five is to be the first. It is so short and jumbled, he explains, because there's nothing intelligent to say about a massacre. On the way to Dresden, Vonnegut spends a night in a Boston hotel where his perception of passing time becomes distorted, as if someone were playing with the clocks. He reads about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in the bedside Gibeon Bible and likens himself to Lot's wife, who against God's will be looked back at the burning cities and was turned into a pillar of salt. Vonnegut muses that the book he's just written has an inevitable failure, and he resolves not to look back anymore.
That was the scariest story I remember.
Oh, the Sodom and Gomorrah.
In Catholic school.
Yeah.
I had nightmares about that one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's turning to salt.
Yeah.
Fires. Yeah.
Apparently,
I think that was a good call, Jay. I think getting one out of the way was a good call.
Yeah, because it doesn't have.
Yeah, right.
It doesn't really flow with the rest of the book anyway.
No, I think that was a good call.
Yeah. Apparently, the Sodom and Gomorrah, one scholars are thinking, was actually ancient war propaganda, because if you notice at the end of the story, because the daughters perform incest and they become the Moabites and the Ammonites, which are their enemies. And so it's kind of like, oh, see, they're children of incest. That's why we can, so that's
would be interesting. That's possible. Yeah, that is absolutely possible. Now, if you follow the Ancient Aliens series, that TV show, I seem to remember an episode where they talked about ancient evidence of nuclear weapons being detonated, like way back thousands and thousands of years ago.
I think they're all on Netflix.
They probably are. There's hundreds of them, I bet. Yeah. But how there was like radioactive glass found as if some nuclear weapon went off in some town in a desert and turned everything to glass.
Yeah, wow.
It's just interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know truth on that or even the details of the episode.
There's a lot of crazy stuff on that show.
There's some crazy stuff.
I mean, there's just a lot of stuff that you, like, me and you will sit and talk about this stuff.
Yeah, a lot of crazy
stuff.
We'll
be like looking at the stars and talking about. But I mean, honestly, like a lot of like the hieroglyphic type stuff they have across the world in different areas, and they depict the same stuff, and there is no way for those people to communicate across the world.
Right. Yeah. You had the ancient Egyptians drawing pictures, and then the ancient Mayans drawing the same pictures, and they didn't have emails or the internet or anything back then.
Yes, and you have all of these books, and they kind of think about the future and different stuff, and they all have their different takes on it. So it's not like you can say, well, of course, all the cultures drew the same thing because
it was intuitive.
That was intuitive, right? People have different ways of thinking of stuff. So I just find it fascinating. I don't know the answers. I just like hearing everybody's different views. I just like absorbing different views on different stuff, and then thinking, well, maybe it's possible.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not gonna say it's not because I don't have answers.
Yeah. Oh, it's Whispering Pines. Hey, Whispering Pines. Welcome. Unfortunately, we're wrapping up. But hello. Welcome.
Come back next week.
Yeah, absolutely. Come back same time next Sunday or 1 hour earlier next Sunday because we start at 7 Central Time. So
Right. So we're going to start on chapter 2.
Yeah, we'll go to we'll start on chapter 2. Hey, Chris, start on chapter 2 of Slaughterhouse-Five.
Slaughterhouse-Five.
Where the book really starts.
And Billy's decline. Oh.
Right. Yeah. It's 10 chapters, 9 chapters, 9 more chapters.
Yeah. I'm at the point where they're threatening to put him where his mother is. But it's been so long for you, Daniel.
I know. This was like 3 months ago. Like, wait a minute. Wait a minute. What happened with it? I know.
It was a struggle for me to finish it. I did. Like, I bought like a whole bunch of stuff because I listened to it. Yeah. So I bought like a bunch of stuff to do a canning project.
Right. Yeah. She's been canning chicken.
I was like, the only way I'm getting through this thing is if I just buy a ton of stuff.
Right.
I can't. So I canned chicken. I canned broth. I canned beans. I was just doing this. I got this huge project because I'm like, I've got.
And she listened to the book the whole time.
I listened to the book the whole time. I got 7 hours to get through this. I'm going to tell you though, if you listen to it, and if you listen to the James Franco version, I love James Franco, but he was real slow in the way he was talking. Yeah. So Audible gives you the ability to speed it up, so I went to 1.2 for his talking speed, which cut it down from like 11 hours to like 7, and it was much easier to get through the book that way.
Fast forward is what she's saying.
Yeah, but I mean, he was speaking so slowly that it was really drawn and like dragging out. Yeah, so I mean, that's just a tip. If you don't like it that much, maybe put it on like 1.5 and just make it go faster.
Right, speed it up a little bit.
I'm actually finding it kind of interesting. I feel, even though he's a bit disjointed, he's got a semi-poetic kind of. He's got a kind of poetic style. I'm finding it interesting anyway. Yeah.
He's got to have someone that appreciates him.
I liked it. I liked it. I did.
I've got to go, guys. Sorry.
For sure. No, we're past time anyway. Yeah.
All right,
absolutely.
We'll see everybody next week.
See you guys next week.
Yeah, make sure everyone's here. It'll be great.